Hello. Today we're back with the man who used to wear the $5,000 suits, although he no longer does that, these days. And so David Amerland, is my pleasure to have him on this hangout in the series of hangouts on his wonderful book SEO Help. It seems like it's been a while since David already published another book on trust, which I highly recommend. You can get from his website, davidamerland.com, and amazon.com, and any other booksellers. That's out. And David, of course, still has 8 other books you can take a look at. But today we're talking about the step number 6, or chapter number 6 in the book SEO Help, which is called voice. David, I'll let you introduce the voice concept, please.
Okay. Thank you, Oleg, and thanks for making the time for this. Essentially, we talk about voice, and what do we mean exactly? And voice is the way we talk, the way we use the expressions we use, the way we shape the content, the way we reach out to our audience. It's really important because essentially, like perhaps clothes, or even perhaps more important, like attitude, it connects our own understanding of the audience expectations, our own understanding of what they need in terms of what they need to consume in the content we produce, and it exhibits a certain degree of empathy. And to give an example of this, you can go into a place and say howdy, and it's a different kind, still saying hi, different response and a different kind of connection than if you go into the place and say, "Oh, ye fellows, I greet you heartily." And
not in America, but yes.
Sorry?
Not in America, but yes.
Yes. Well, you could try it in America. You might find some very odd looks coming your way. But essentially, what it shows is that the way that you use to connect, the voice which you use, the way you actually use your expressions, embodies your own understanding of the identity of the people you talk to, their expectations, the commonalities between them and you, and the shared concepts of what you're actually communicating. So it's a better way of communicating.
Gotcha. I was thinking about the voice. Obviously, everything you said makes a lot of sense, but I was thinking about it from a standpoint of kind of 2 things. Number one, it's really your voice online is a part of your identity. That's what really kind of defines you in a major way, is the way you talk to your audience. That's part of the voice. It's essentially your identity to one degree. And then the other degree, it's also a way to become unique, because as you pointed out before, everybody's identities have been taken. You have your own, nobody else has it. So you need to have some way to connect with people in a different way than everybody else connects with them. And I think that's where the voice part, at least that's what I look into when I look at the term voice. That's what to me it stands for. It's number one, it's kind of who I am, meaning my identity as it comes across on the website, blog, whatever I'm doing my post, things like that. But also it's the unique part which makes that voice, because a lot of people post online. A lot of people have identity where they're computer consultants, or they're SEO specialists, or whatever they might be, authors, so on. That doesn't make you unique. What makes you unique is some other aspects of the voice, and I think that's what kind of to me compiles the voice itself as the voice that comes across to people, I guess.
Yeah, that's a very important point you actually bring up. Essentially, when we talk about semantic search, we are not really talking about a data point or a presence or anything else. We're actually talking about an entity. We're talking about a unique business or a unique person. And the moment we have that, they always do things in ways which are individual to them. If you're a person, even if you're growing up in the same household with 10 other brothers, your mother has no problem differentiating amongst you because you're all different. And the way you talk, the way you express yourselves, the way you dress reflects that. And essentially, that's what semantic search is all about. This is what all the different aspects of it are all about. How do we begin to define that uniqueness? By creating what I usually call semantic data density. And what I mean by that is that, if you think for a moment about how we operate in the real world, there is so many things about us which make us real, as opposed to a projection. The way we dress, the way we move, the way we interact with the environment, the way we actually think, the way we express those thoughts. I mean, all of that is incredibly dense from a data point of view. And when we get to the web, we don't have that equal sort of degree of data density. We have a website. We have some content. We have perhaps a presence here and a presence there. And creating a real data density to all this requires a real effort to bring what is inside us as a business or as a person or as a brand, whether that is an individual brand or a corporate brand, to the outside. And the moment we succeed, then suddenly nobody has any difficulty understanding that, hey, it's us. A clearest example perhaps is the Coca-Cola logo. Now, Coca-Cola has invested for so long, so heavily in advertising, that they've actually created an entity almost out of their logo. You can see just a third of it, and you know what it is. You don't have to see the whole thing. And not only do you know what it is, but even more importantly, you know what it stands for. Yes, it's a soft drink, etc., but there's also the shared values of happiness and wellness and everything else that the company has worked so hard to actually project and stand behind. And that's the approach, that's the voice, that's what we're trying to create.
Right. And one of the things that Gina just pointed out in the comment is about the unique part is that she says that we each already have that unique part. It's mainly of allowing it to surface. And so a couple of things I want to touch on. Number one is the fake element of it, because obviously we all can, and many people do use the fake elements to get it to basically what they do is they substitute their voice for a totally different voice because they can. And so obviously there is some element of whether it be greed or whether it be malicious or whether it doesn't matter what the reasons are. Bottom line is they're not sticking to their true voice. And so as we talked about in the trust segment before, which we are going to finish, by the way, for those who haven't watched the trust deal, we're going to have another hangout to finish that conversation. But the fact that people obviously do different things, and it's difficult sometimes for other people to understand how important it is to be genuine, because short term you may accomplish something that you wanted to accomplish, but long term it's still going to, transparency is still going to come out at some point in time. I mean, we know it works the same way with lying, everything else. So would you like to address a little bit about this connection between the voice and the trust element?
Yes, and actually, I love what Gina brought up, and let me also address what you just said in terms of creating the kind of element of trust in what we do and why we don't always do it. Let's consider for a minute the paradoxical nature of actually having somebody tell us or having to read a book in order to understand how we can be us. I mean, why should we ever have to do that? If we have to do that, and obviously we do, the question is that there are a lot of perceptions and a lot of elements which make us behave in a different way. And we behave in a different way because we think that that is the way to move forward, that is the way to gain trust, and that is the way to actually get on in business and make connections. For a large part of the 20th century, things worked because we projected those expected values, and because we projected them in a large enough scale and were persistent enough, they became believable. So it was very much an approach of trust us because of who we are, or believe in us because we say it loudly enough and often enough. And this is no longer enough. On the web, we have transparency because we now have connectivity, which allows us, even as an individual, to track a brand or a business or even a person and see if they're consistent. If we're projecting a false image, which doesn't have any degree of interactivity, it becomes very difficult to sustain it. There are just simply too many cracks, too much effort. It is truly unsustainable long term. So the moment we have inconsistencies, we create uncertainties. The moment we have uncertainty, we have a perceived lack of trustworthiness, which makes it unlikely for anyone to want to undertake the risk and actually connect with us for a business transaction or listen to us when it comes to any kind of in-depth kind of information. So really, the only winning proposition here is to really be ourselves. But there's an element of fear in that. If you're a new person starting in business, for instance, you want to say, okay, well, I'm new and I'm inexperienced. I really don't want to project that because no one will want to do business with me. And here's where the new mindset really comes in. We need to be able to understand that any new business doesn't necessarily mean that they're not good at what they're doing. It just means that they're new at what it is that they do. And they should be able to project it in a transparent enough manner, showing why they are ideal as a choice and actually allowing their audience to find them and connect with them in real time in terms of the real values that they project. And that's a relatively new way of approaching things, new in terms of the industrial revolution we live in, certainly not new in the post-industrial revolution world where it was the only way of actually moving forward. So how do we become us? Why is it that we need to actually surface what's inside us, as Gina said, what's inside our organizations, what's inside the individual? Well, we need to do it by essentially identifying the perceived obstacles, whether it's the need to adopt a specific way of projecting content in a specific industry sector, or a specific way of doing things. If you think that you need to have huge advertising, a very glitzy approach and very canned messages, because it's always been done that way, doesn't mean it still works. And now we actually need a kind of bravery, I would say, to take a step forward and actually open up and show a certain degree of vulnerability, which then leads us back to the element of trust. We're trusting our audience to understand that and make that connection.
Okay. All right, let's look at it from a little different perspective now. In terms of addressing the audiences, because we're talking specifically SEO based because of the book, and also this the whole conversation, all these chapters is all SEO related. So when you're addressing an audience, most of the time, my favorite statement, people are people, you're addressing different kinds of people. They have different wants, they have different desires, different that. And so with that, a lot of times, not a lot of times, all the time, when you talk to different people, you do not talk to them in the same exact way. Even though, yes, you are you, but at the same time, I mean, the simplest example to show it would be talking to children versus talking to adults. You do not talk to little children in the same way. It's still you, but you're talking like a totally different person in many, many different ways. You might change your voice when you talk to little kids, to be a little bit more, kid-friendly. You talk about different topics because that's what they're interested in. You're not going to be talking about, blacklist and how much you like it to somebody who's 3-year-old. I mean, they're just not going to fly. At the same time, talking about, Goku on Dragon Ball Z Kai is not something you would pick up with a new stranger who is 55 years old. So with that being the case, how do you address the issue? Because you have different audiences, on your online content. How do you address this in talking to different people in different way? And how do you take care of that considering the online environment? I know it's a tough question, David, but I can't ask anybody else who knows it as well as you do.
That's an extremely interesting question, and really, and I'm very glad you brought up Dragon Balls, because Goku was the main character in that. We throughout the series, he goes from a little boy to a superhero, essentially, and he faces a lot of challenges, and he transforms himself into a different person almost. But throughout the series, he's actually the same person. He's got the same values. And how do we know that? Well, first of all, he never gives up. If he has something which he has to do, he always does it, even if it's going to kill him. He always gives second chances to people because it's the right thing to do. And he always does the right thing, even if it's going to cost him his life. So you take these three things through a series which goes on for, about, I think it's 8 seasons. It's actually quite long. And it becomes a recognizable character whom you begin to value because you know what he stands for and you like him. He's actually likable because of what he does and the way he does things. So it's a kind of empathy which you create by projecting your inner values. And here's a difficult part of the conversation. It's very easy to buy advertising. It's very easy to, get any kind of canned message to project any kind of product that you have. It's very easy to project any kind of image for your business, but it's very, very difficult to actually look inward and say, what is it that makes me different? What is it that makes me special? What is it that actually makes me want to do this beyond the need to make money, which we all need to in order to survive. And it's that internal dialogue that's actually the hardest. And if it feels hard as an individual because it's very esoteric, it's very inward looking, imagine how hard it is for a large company to carry out, where it has to look inside itself and say, what is it that makes us special? Why are we different from our competition? But unless you answer those questions, then you can't do what you just suggested must be done, where you talk to different audiences using differentiations in perhaps the content and the approach, but essentially you're still you. And that's where inconsistencies can come in. If you really are fake, then you're almost an entirely different person talking to a kid as when you're talking to you. If we have a sociopath who is a serial killer amongst ourselves, talking to a kid, different person. Talking to you, entirely different person. He may be likable in both scenarios, but you think, that is such a weird character transformation. And then if you have an adult who is not a sociopath, again, he changes tone and approach and content to talking to a young child. Amongst adults, he's different, but he's recognizably the same person. That's the kind of thing that it's really hard to fake long term. You can really fake it in a narrow context. You take a long point of view or a long enough time, and you can actually see it. And it comes from that inner understanding. That's why, we talk about semantic search, we talk about search engine optimization, which is SEO, which is, a technical subject. But really, we're not talking about these things. We're also talking about values. We're talking about branding. We talk about brand values. We talk about business principles. We talk about character and how all those things now come together. And in the web these days, you can't really separate one from the other. You can't say, well, I've got great SEO on my site, but as a company, we don't really care about customers, and we'll hide that through, some really cool advertising and great customer service copy. Well, you can't do it because it will actually come across.
Yeah, I think the key thing is to not to diminish the word SEO or the value of the book, speaking of SEO, but at the same time, I think the voice, what you put out there online, should be the main focus of concentration for any business. The SEO part, if you do that well, will automatically work its way accordingly with semantic search the way it is. So I think the easy way to suggest something to businesses is do not do SEO for the sake of SEO. Simply do your website the way it should be done, and your whole online presence with social media, blogs, everything, and then SEO will basically take care of itself. Is that an accurate way to say it?
Absolutely, exactly. I mean, one of the things which, one of the sort of slightly misinformation things which came out when semantic search came along were people saying, oh, semantic search is here. I don't need to worry about SEO anymore. Well, actually you do, but it's a lot bigger now than just a very narrow context of something which you did only on your website so that you can come up in search. Now, the content has to be right, the content creation has to be right, your intent has to be right, the values behind everything have to be right, your products have to be right. So that's why it makes it so real. That's why it has to be you. If you don't have a real business, if you're not a real person, if you're just there to sell something, take the money and run kind of thing, well, that really will not fly anymore. You won't get very far. So that's why.
Yeah, and this is one of the things to consider also to make people feel a little bit better, because a lot of people go and I don't know this stuff, I don't do this stuff. I mean, you're talking about being yourself. I can semi-understand that, but then you go into say that you have to do right, you have to have the right products, you have to treat the customers right, and everything else. And it's like a lot of people just kind of throw their hands up and go, "Whoa! I mean, maybe you know how to do it. I don't know how to do this kind of stuff." And the reality is, to make people who are like that feel a little bit better, is that keep in mind that if you listen to this conversation and you get David's book, which I highly recommend, the SEO help book, and then you follow the steps, and we also have the There's a companion tool that's available online for free, which I call it Business Blueprint, basically, which allows you to take all of these action steps and strategies that David talks about in the book. There's 10 per chapter, and you can document what would be relevant to your business, and that way you wind up with almost like a map in terms of your strategy and your game plan, what you need to do and how you need to do it. Once you go through and answer these take these action steps and document them, and then think about them and make them right. That will give you what you need to be able to answer some of these questions. And one of the things to make you feel a little bit better, and I'm talking to all the business people here, is, believe me, if you follow the steps in the book, and if you do exactly, answer the questions, do all the action steps, you'll be heads above your competition, most of your competition. There's definitely people that, obviously, a lot of people buy David's books, a lot of people follow the stuff, people hire companies, people do. But in my experience, being an IT consultant who does, meets a lot of different people, a lot of different businesses, talks to people, you'll be amazed how many people do not do this. And so even if you do a little bit of this, it doesn't have to be necessarily perfect. Like David says, you have to have a perfect product, and you have to have, everything has to be perfect, or it just needs to be that way. Yes, you want to strive for that perfection, but as most of us know, perfection doesn't exist. We can strive for excellence, but we're never going to achieve perfection, because then there's no more growth. So you're always striving to be better. And I think that's the key thing to understand, that a lot of people out there who are in your shoes do not even do the minimum of what needs to be done. So if you take even some of these steps and try to strive for some of the things David is talking about, do the strategy thing, everything else, it makes a huge difference in the outcome. So with that, let's move on to the next question, which is what I wanted to ask you, David. This is another one of these loaded deals, but like I said, you're the only one who can answer it. When you talk to people, people will tell you that obviously influence is very important. Okay, so let's tackle that first. And so there's books by great book by Robert, I think it's Cialdini, I don't know how you pronounce it, that talks about influencing people. And they did, we're talking about not some shyster used car sales. We're talking about psychological proven approach to how people are able to influence other people. Not everybody, not all the time, but majority of the time, based on the scientific studies that they conducted with students in controlled environment, things like that. And he lists all the different things that come into play to help influence people. And as much, it's a very fine line between influencing people for the sake of some sort of malicious intent, or just plain old greed. Bernie Madoff, one of the stars in your trust book, is clearly an example of such, doing it on a massive scale in terms of money, in terms of people, because of the concept of people being able to influence other people. In other words, if I tell to somebody that David Amerland said something, considering your clout and your fame in the realm, so to speak, people will automatically believe me. As long as I quote you, they're automatically going to believe me, even if they don't know me, as long as they know you. So with that being the case, the influence thing, plays a big part, and we got to be very careful, obviously, if we have any self-respect and integrity and honor, to not abuse that. It needs to be used to a certain degree to be able to do some things we're trying to accomplish. But at the same time, it's a very fine line between using this and abusing this, in my view. And so one of the examples that I want to bring up is the example that was in one of Tony Robbins' books. Somebody who I also tremendously admire and respect. He had an example where he was supposed to teach at some army installation people they wanted to improve the accuracy of snipers. And as you know, that in U.S. Armed Forces, pretty much everybody that trains for stuff, they're definitely probably top of the world in terms of their performance and competence. And so he was asked, so Tony Robbins, to set the story straight, was a gentleman who was asked to come in, talk to the army, people who do not like to talk to anybody from the outside, number one. He was asked to make the snipers, who are already probably best in the world, to perform better, okay? Coming in as a guy who has never served a day in the army. He was not in the armed forces. So he's coming into an extremely harsh environment, and he's coming in with it's almost like it's a setup that never going to work. These people don't want him there, which means they're not going to be listening to him most likely. I mean, it's a very, very difficult deal. So what does he do? He's using a power of influence by when he's starting to talk to these generals, basically, or they were colonels, I guess, that kind of level. So it's kind of like not the low end snipers, but at the same time, kind of people in charge of them, but not the main guy, the main general that was there. The main general was missing that day. It just happens to be that he wasn't at that meeting. And so these other guys are sitting, they're all totally against the concept of him even being there. And so he needs to convince them that, and explain to them what he's going to do. And he needs them to buy into it because he was asked to come in. If they don't buy into it, nothing's going to happen. So what he did was he actually stood behind the chair of the general. And at that point in time, he wound up asking some questions which resulted in yes answers because it was almost a given the way he worded it. And at the same time, the fact that he was standing and holding the chair where usually the general sits is, in his opinion, what made the difference in them turning toward him, because they normally have respect and they normally do not question or argue with somebody sitting in that chair, in that location. So it's an interesting example of how sometimes you have all kinds of different ways of how people can and do get influence, even hardened soldiers and stuff in the army, which obviously took him and he was able to do what he was able to do. But that's what I wanted to ask you about. When you project your voice out there to the public at large, what, in your opinion, should people be? Where should they be drawing a line? Which, like I said, I understand it's a very difficult thing for different people. It's a different line. But how far do you go with your voice to influence people? Because in the end, in the beginning, forget the end. The reason you're doing everything online is, like you said, to do more business, to make more money. So you're definitely trying to achieve a certain goal. You're not just putting stuff out there because you're bored, right? So with that being the case, where, in your opinion, I mean, I'd like you to address this particular concept, is that you're going out there with your voice, you're trying to achieve something which will result in a gain for you or your business. Where do you draw that line of influence, not becoming somebody who's taking advantage of somebody else?
Okay, I think that's a really cool question. And let's take it apart a little bit. Okay. First of all, we live in a data-driven world where you quite rightly identified the fact that we all have access to psychological techniques and emotional studies and psycho triggers which show us what we need to do in order to grab somebody's attention. Now, you gave the example of Tony Robbins. I thought that was brilliant. He faced a difficult environment. We all need attention in order for a message to come in. And our audience is always challenged. It's challenged because sometimes it's hostile, because they don't think we have any right to tell them what to do. Sometimes it's just busy. They think that they can't give us the time of day that we need simply because they haven't got it. And sometimes it's not aware of the value we can bring in. Or it can be a combination of the three. So essentially the question is, how do we grab their attention? If you don't have the attention, then whatever message you have, whatever value you can bring to them is going to be lost. So really, all those things which we use, the emotional triggers, the psychosocial studies, the psychological emotional points which we can actually apply, they need to be applied selectively to grab that attention. And then, and here comes the main point, we have to deliver the promise of our premise. So essentially, if you promise something with your opening gambit and you cut somebody's attention, you really need to deliver. If you don't, you're not going to get their attention ever again. If Tony Robbins couldn't have delivered what he did, then holding their attention in the first instance and overcoming the obstacle, the psychological obstacle that the trained soldiers and snipers put in place by holding onto the general's chair and addressing them from there, it wouldn't have worked long term. But what he did very cleverly is he managed to overcome their objections in the first instance, hold their attention long enough for them to listen, internalize his message, and suddenly understand very clearly the value of what he was delivering. And that's what each of us has to do. Understandably, we all struggle to grab somebody's attention. The online world is extremely crowded. There are only 24 hours to the day, and we try all the little different tricks and techniques that we can actually get hold of. That's great. It's not a great thing to, it's not something which we can object to in a very serious way, but then you'd better deliver. And that's what you're judged by. If you consistently use techniques and tricks, and clickbait is a perfect example here, where you have a sensational title, it gets you there, you give somebody a click, and then, 5-minute read, it's 5 minutes of your life you've lost, you're never getting back. It hasn't given you anything. You feel very cheated of that because time was stolen from you. And that's how we need to approach it. Essentially, we need to have huge respect for our audience. We need to understand that, yes, we have to work very hard to get their attention, but once we have it, we better make sure we reward that by giving them solid content, solid value, something they can find useful, valuable, and something they can do something with. If we don't have that kind of approach, if all we want is eyeballs on our site, traffic on our site, clickbait content, sensationalist approaches that will simply grab people's attention momentarily, well, we're in a losing proposition there, because it will work for a while, but then after a while, we have no more audience to actually reach, and we're going to get fewer and fewer people coming, and that's it. We'll have used up all our bag of tricks without delivering anything, having lost the opportunity entirely of actually finding the audience we deserve.
Yeah, and I think it's actually beyond just losing a bag of tricks or using a bag of tricks, because I think the situation of using some of these influence techniques, like I said, in some cases, I think the way I would word it is you need to look at it with your own set of values in terms of where that line is, because all of us are capable of, I've said it before, you can be a Hitler, you can be Mother Teresa. I mean, all of us are capable of all of it in the whole range in between. It's just how low we allow ourselves to sink, if you will, determines the kind of person we are, the kind of entity we are as a business. And so I think for each business, it's different to what degree they're willing to step forward and use some of these techniques. Like I said, clearly Tony Robbins, who is a very well-known, established, made a lot of money, very, very famous guy, he still used the technique to stand behind his general's chair for a reason, because he knows human psychology really well. He knows what he was going to do. In other words, it wasn't just some accidental deal where he just happened to be stumbling and he landed at the chair. He was standing behind it specifically to influence these people. But in the end, even though he used a technique like he did, potentially, in the end, it's all about delivery. And to some degree, you can say that, as some people suggest, may he rest in peace now, under promise and over deliver. That's what Steve Jobs said. And so I think that's one of the good things to remember, that if you do not overpromise, so you do not stretch yourself to the point where you can't deliver what you're promising, even if it's a huge amount of stuff that you're trying to promise that you're going to deliver, and it looks so great that people can get all the stuff, if you overpromise even by a tiny bit compared to what you actually delivered, people are going to be mad. And this is where the trust situation completely breaks loose. That, look, all the stuff I've done for you, I've done a ton of stuff for you, just not as much as I promised. And immediately the trust is broken, just as if it was broken on any other level. Trust is still broken because you did not accomplish what you said. Case in point being, I downloaded this application from my phone called Call Recorder. And the guy said, in the deal that this was, the best call recorder out there, number one, such and such. And I don't know if it's number one or not number one. I don't know. I just know that it was, rated 5 stars, but only rated with 1 review. So that immediately gives you pause. The bottom line being is the application did not work at all. It did not record. So I wrote this nasty review because I can, and because the guy deserved it, because you do not sell, because this was not a free app. If it was a free app, I wouldn't have written a review, because it doesn't work for me. It's a free app. I'm not paying anything. But this was something I actually paid for, which is a totally different level now of promise, and it doesn't work. And what doesn't work? I mean, it looks ugly. There's a bunch of different problems with it, but the main thing, it doesn't record phone calls. It's called the call recorder. That's the core function it's supposed to do. It doesn't do that. So I wrote a bad review. The guy writes back saying, we did a rigorous testing. It works on a bunch of phones. It doesn't work on yours. Well, number one, make it so I can't even download it, and don't charge me any money for it if that's the case. You know what I mean? So the trust thing winds up being broken practically to the point of no repair. It doesn't matter what he says to me at this point in time. It just, the trust was broken because he said it was the #1 call recorder. He didn't say it was the #1 call recorder except for your phone. And that's, I think, this is a perfect example of a lot of stuff in business. But at the same time, when we're talking about, projecting the voice out there, the business with being kind of muted and saying under promise and over delivering is not difficult. You can definitely do it. Everybody to some degree who is cares about their business, they do it. But the under promise thing, you wind up cutting your own success to some degree, because if you under promise, then people may not see enough value in what you're bringing to be able to give you business. So you need to be also very careful about the under promise thing. Over deliver is simple. Under promise, you got to be careful not to scale back so far that you're not actually pushing your services, your products to the point where people will buy them, or at least with some people. So it's one of these kind of tough deals. But with that, let's move on to the next deal. And the next deal is also interesting and also loaded. Today we just have nothing but loaded questions. Okay. And that is dealing with the subject of quantity of information. Now, it's when you talk to people, the business people will tell you that, there's all kinds of, I don't know, I think it's from Buddha or somebody else, some quote about silence is golden, or, that basically the bottom line is that talk less and listen more. That's the moral of the story, is the best way to communicate with somebody when you talk to somebody is you need to be an excellent listener, not just blah, 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 which is what I'm doing right now. But I'm doing it because I have to do it. So with that being the case, that people in the business realm that know what's going on and know how to work well, they always suggest that you need to be a good listener, you need to listen well when you communicate, things like that. If that's the case, how does this, David, play in the online world where it's not interactive? In the interactive realm, I can understand that, and everybody understands that. But because usually online you have a one-way direction, I mean, most of it, your website, yes, you can have comments, but realistically, we're talking about one-way communication. Hangout here is a different deal. But if you're talking about your online presence, you got your blog, you got your website, you got all that. When you push the information and have your voice be heard, you're really going in one direction. You're not having a dialogue until you get into the comments section, which you may or may not get. So initially, like your website doesn't even have comments most of the time. You just push the information. So with that being the case, how does this play along with the concept of being listening versus talking, when here you need to talk to be able to have people even have something to consider to address, in terms of comments and everything later on?
Yep. Okay. Again, as you said, it's a loaded question in many ways, and I'm very glad you brought it up.
You're welcome.
Essentially, how do we listen to our audience? The first instance, at the very beginning, when we have, let's say, zero engagement and we're just setting out in business, the first thing which we must do primarily is actually lay things out, the way the website works, the way navigation works, the way the content works, the way perhaps the buying process works, if it's buying from our site. The way communications work, so that it's as frictionless as a process as possible for the end user. Now, what the classic mistake we normally make is, because we're experts at what we do, we assume that the expertise we put in there is enough, because it's a lot of it and it's deep, and that's the value proposition, and everything else is secondary, and that's not true. As a matter of fact, everything else is probably as important, if not more important, than the value proposition we bring to the table. Because everything else shows the amount of respect and thinking we have carried out towards our audience. And it shows that we're willing to think as they do. They don't have time to go through a lot of pages of jargon. They don't have time to go through page after page of their website to find out what they want. They don't have time to go through a 7-step checkout process. They don't have the time to spend 30 minutes trying to look for a return guarantee if things go wrong. So these are the things which are really important, and they may not seem so important in the push to set up a business and make it work online, but actually they are. And that's exactly the first step of listening in the online world. And then, of course, there's the other thing where, when we have a social media presence, we have the ability to directly talk to our audience And that's when a real voice comes across. If you're going to be condescending and consider that pretty much they're wasting your time unless they make a purchase from you, well, that's going to come through. If you're not going to listen to their concerns when they're being negative, then again, that's also going to come through. Because essentially what we're getting in any kind of engagement, any kind of interaction, is free consulting from the people who are actually going to buy our product or our service. It's free advice from the audience we're actually hoping to reach. So their suggestions and engagement and ideas are helping us perhaps find some kind of validation for what we do, but also how to improve it and how to make it better and how to evolve with their needs. And talking about evolution now and slightly changing the subject ever so slightly, when I wrote my book on trust, I researched some companies, and we get companies in Europe that are like 650 years old. We get companies in Japan that they're like 1,000 years old. They're not essentially doing exactly the same thing that they did, in the Middle Ages. They have evolved with their audience. They have actually refined what they do. They have moved with them. But the only way they have been able to achieve that is by having a very real connection between them as a business and as people, and their audience as real people with real needs, real concerns, and ever-evolving needs and concerns as we move forward.
By the way, for those who don't understand, now I understood why David stopped wearing suits. What's happening is he's dealing with these companies that are thousands of years old, in Japan, for example, and he knows that nobody had a suit 1,000 years ago, and they would just fine survive. So I think that's where he decided, you know what, if that works for them all this time, I don't see why it wouldn't work for me. Is that an
There you go. No, not quite. I mean, I decided to stop wearing suits because I thought, if that's the primary reason you're actually connecting with me, if it's a kind of superficial level and you don't actually know what I do, I'm not really willing at this stage to actually go into a huge amount of effort and time to convince you. So go away, research me. If you think we can do business together, great. If you're not, I will respect that, and there's no problem. And that's how I work these days.
Yeah, and for 0.3% of 0.1% of population that doesn't know who David Amerland is, by all means go and Google David Amerland, and you'll find everything you want to know about the man. And you can go to davidamerland.com and get information about his books, get information, some of the excellent blog posts he makes all the time. You can find him everywhere, basically. So speaking of finding everywhere, that kind of is a good segue into our my next topic, and that is that you have things like websites which are one-way streets, pretty much, like I mentioned. People do WordPress; it has comments capability, but to paint things the way they really are, for the most part, it's a one-way street. You have things like blogs, which for the most part, except for the ones that really get a lot of engagement, again, usually have very little to no comments. So usually it's a one-way, you just keep pushing information out in one direction. But when you're looking at things like, for example, Twitter or things like Google Plus, and I mean the old Google Plus, not the new, oh my God, Google Plus, but the old Google Plus, you can see that it's very much a two-way conversation. And I think that's one of the, especially if you look at things like Twitter, where you can quickly exchange messages. And of course, the Hangouts, obviously, much more so. So there is a way to get the interactivity part done, so you don't have to worry about that part being on your website, because you can always jump into a little Hangout and you can chat with people, address their needs. People can, you can have a special Twitter account set up just for conversation with clients and customer service, things like that. So there's many different ways you can interact stuff. So with that being the case, I guess my question is, in terms of projecting your voice, do you have any SEO related suggestions for people doing things in an interactive mode, like in social media, versus doing it on, in this one-way mode?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Well, first of all, I mean, it always depends on the size of the company. I mean, if if it's like a small company with 2 or 3 people or 5 or 10 people, it's always easier to manage than if it's 100 or 1,000 people. But the first thing you have to do is you need to make sure that your internal communication is absolutely spot on. You need to be able to actually connect with each other like you would as if you're in a very friendly environment, even if you're geographically apart. And you need to be able to share concerns and values and vision. If you don't do that, then the moment you have somebody come into center stage and talk to people, you're going to have problems because you don't trust them. You don't know what they're going to say. They're probably going to say something which is different from what the website covers because they don't know, because nobody told them. They're probably going to overreact to something because, again, they don't know how far to react or not react against things. That causes a lot of issues. And what you just said shows the difficulty of actually doing these things now in a very public domain. You know, if you're a company, what you want to do is put up higher barricades, put up higher walls, bigger adverts in front, and get everybody else behind, and just have customers go through a little front door, buy the product and go away. It doesn't work like that. So essentially, if you're going to have your employees front and center, you better make sure that within the company, you're absolutely right with them. You know, your communication is right, your values are right, you're treating people like people, and you all understand what it is that you're actually doing, who you are, what your values are, and what your company does. It's a huge internal conversation that's very disruptive to 20th century businesses as they morph into 21st century businesses. A lot of them, I must say, will not make that transition. Case in point, VW, a company that's 73 years old, I think, now 78. And they have failed in the 21st century by basically lying to us, to our face. And, you know, things are continuing to crop up. Their October sales were down. It appears in the internal investigation that went on that they also lied about CO2 emissions. It appears that they also lied to the EU Commission about the NOx emissions of their cars. So now what are we seeing? We're seeing, you know, they got caught in one public lie. And as things unravel, we begin to see a sliding scale of lie after lie and crisis after crisis coming up, and that doesn't bode well. You know, it's a death of a thousand cuts. Every mistake they make is costing them money. They can only hemorrhage money for so long, they will go away. But they're a classic example of an old mindset failing to grasp what it is they must do in the 21st century. So to come back to what you said, how do we do this? The easy thing is be yourself. You think, okay, what does that mean really? Tell me what I need to do. Well, what you need to do is make sure that everybody's on board. You know, if you're going to come across as some kind of robber baron because that's what you are, at least be honest about it. Say, you know, this is what I am. I tie my people to their desks. I make them work 14 hours a day. I pay them very little, but we produce a great product at a great price. Be honest and allow people to make a decision. Do they want to do business with you? Don't say, we value our people. We are a very customer-centric company, and here's our product which does everything. Because like the app you bought, it didn't. And the moment it didn't, you reacted, and your review is unlikely to do that developer any good. People are unlikely to go and buy that app now. And it's the same thing with any kind of product. We are very transparent, visible in the way we work. We share our opinions. We're very quick to actually shy away from anything that doesn't appear to be right.
Got you. Okay. Hopefully this guy won't commit suicide now.
Well, hopefully he'll fix the app, right?
Hopefully he'll fix the app, exactly. Anyway, I guess that takes us, we're pretty close here to the end of this particular conversation. So I think it's a good segue into the final deal, which is, you know, you talked about VW. So let me ask you a very put you on the spot kind of question, because I just want to know. In your opinion, should VW cease to exist based on what happened?
Well, I think
this is a yes or no question, by the way.
Well, no, in my opinion, it shouldn't. But I think it needs to change. I mean, you know, it's very easy to be judgmental and say, hey, you lied, you need to pay a price. But they're actually paying a price. And let's think that beyond the people who actually are in the wrong within the company and made all those decisions, there's a lot of innocent lives attached. People who make a livelihood out of it, people who are relying on this, and they took everything at face value and didn't question it. And, you know, they shouldn't be washed away completely. I think the company needs to change. Again, my book on trust showed that anybody can change and rehabilitate themselves, provided there's true change and they're willing to make true adjustments and then show us how they changed so we can believe them. So hopefully VW will be able to do that. I'm not so sure, because all we see these days are the mistakes which keep coming up, and the layers of lying that went on. If they can actually manage to turn that around by being a little bit more proactive, they will survive. If not, if they become, if they approach it in a traditional mindset, thinking, oh, we'll do things slowly and people will forget, well, we won't, and the company will not survive because the costs that it's running up are huge. So, money at the end of the day is exactly that. It's energy. If it comes out of the company, it will not be able to sustain it.
Right. Okay, so there you go. It shows the humanity of David Amerland. Beyond everything, death of 1,000 cuts, comment, everything, he still thinks they should survive. Well, on that particular question here, I completely and totally disagree with him. I think they should die, mostly because of coming from Stalinist Russia. I can't think any other way. But to a large degree, I think it also needs to be an example, because the more companies, the more Bernie Madoffs we have, the more Enrons we have, the more Volkswagens we have, it gives over time an impression to other companies that even if you screw up royally, which is exactly what they did, it's not some little mistake that they made and they recalled the product that had the paint a little bit off, and now they recalled it so they can finish the painting properly. This is not that kind of mistake. And this was malicious, intentional way to mislead people, to fool municipalities, to fool countries for the sake of basically a certain amount of profits,
making money.
All of that. So with that being the case, and I'm all for companies making money, but not at this kind of way. And so to me, they should definitely go down as an example that this is not how you do business. Because if they don't go down, then it's nothing but a precedent, as in legal profession, precedents are everything, that yes, you can do a royal deal and you can still survive. One example of a major screw up, although I don't think it was supposed to be a monumental, they should have gone down, was BP. And that was an example of also something that people just fell, things fell through the cracks and people fell on the job and they did not do what they should have done to prevent the disaster. That said, they have a lot more locations worldwide, everything else, they did the cleanup. All of that stuff was, one deal, even though because it was on U.S. soil, it's so, more kind of egregious in our eyes. But still, that I can kind of see them coming back, even though I'm hesitant even on that. But VW, to me, okay, considering what they've done, they should definitely, to me, they should deserve to go out of business. I mean, sell out all their stuff, have somebody else pick up and do better, but, they should not be in business. With that being the case, let's finish out the conversation with another topic dealing with this, and that is, obviously, like you said, David, before, that, businesses are not businesses. Businesses are entities with people behind them who make decisions, who make actions. So it's really not, even though you're holding business responsible, but you have executives, you have mid-management, you have, all the minions. Everybody makes up a business, okay? And the bigger the business, the more people you have involved. But in the end of the day, it's the people that do all these things. It wasn't VW, the company with the visa everywhere. They didn't do anything. It's people who were running it who made this decision and who made it happen this way. So people are really to blame, but it's like fighting wars. When you have a country that starts a war, then you fight the country. It doesn't really, you don't look at it from that other perspective. So going back to our conversation about the voice is that, when you have a company like, for example, yours, or a company like mine, even though we deal with other people, for the most part, our persona and our voice online and everything else is just a single person. So you don't, neither you or I have to worry about somebody screwing up the works here, because the only people we can blame is ourselves, because we're one-man shop, so to speak. And yes, we partner here and there with people and we collaborate things there. But for the most part, the Amerland.com is a single person. It's not a whole bunch of people making decisions on the corporate level, right?
That's right, yes.
You're dealing with companies, even small companies of 5 people, 10 people, 20 people, and then all the way to thousands of people. The deal with voice, I mean, you're still going to have certain people making the, your web people, your social media people. They're the ones who actually make posts and create content and things like that.
Yes.
So the question becomes is, when you say you have to be yourself, everybody understands that's the case. But when you're dealing with a corporate entity, some sort of a company, the message and the voice itself needs to change to reflect the company. In other words, you can't just be yourself for the sake of whatever company you're working for. It needs to be a company voice that goes out there to the public if you're posting under the company's umbrella. How do you, my question, I guess, is how do you take, if you understand how to do your own voice, how do you make the corporate voice, and what should companies do to create that voice, and where should it come from, things like that? In other words, you see what I'm saying, what I'm asking.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, that's basically the $1 million question of our times. That's why social media is so disruptive to traditional companies. What you need to do, and it's simple, you need basically to go from a command and control structure where you try to find ways to control every employee to finding ways to connect with every employee. And that requires a tremendous amount of effort and energy spent internally, which is what really gives it value. The moment you spend that kind of energy internally, this kind of effort internally, suddenly acquires real value, build real relationships, you begin to network internally as a team or a family or whatever you want to call it, and a lot of fresh value, fresh energy arises out of the process. However, because there's an effort involved, if we look at it from a very traditional point of view, from the 20th century world, that's money which, because it costs money, that's money which is taken off the bottom line, and it doesn't give you anything. It doesn't sell anything. You still have the workforce, whether you do it or not. So you say, well, I've got 10,000 people working for me. Whether I command and control them through my directives and memos, or I work really hard to connect with them, and it costs me money and effort, and have conferences and training and new network gear for everybody to connect. They still work for me. I'm still paying them. So scenario A, I command and control them, X amount of cost. It goes into the equation, which gives me, costs this, I sell this product by, the difference is the profit. Or equation B, where I constantly invest internally in my people and development. We form these relationships, new problems arise, new values arise, and I make slightly less money, at least in the short term. Long term, obviously, we know which way is going to work out better. But in the short term, that's the real difficulty. And if you have any kind of team, whether it's 5 people, 10 people, 10,000 people, you need to invest, really invest, personally, emotionally, and intellectually in communicating with them, in creating relationships, in breaking down barriers, in understanding their motivation, in getting them to understand yours, and creating, essentially, shared values. So when you get to a situation where the company talks to you through any kind of person, not just one person, then the company talks in the same understanding of what it is that the company does, what the business does. And that's how you get that voice being projected, which is shows you also what you need to do in order to get it in the first place. You need to communicate internally like a real team that actually respects each other. And you don't necessarily have all to like each other, but the respect has to be there. If the respect isn't there, then you're not going to get anything else.
Yeah. So basically, of course, you can always use the plan C, which would be, in Russia, they used to call these things firing squads. If somebody posts and it couldn't post, that's how that's how you control the message. And for 70 years they were able to do it. But obviously, you heard it from David Amerland. Plan B is the way to go. And I think the only last thing I'll add to that is that the key thing, just to kind of solidify it, is that if you have a company of multiple people, it's important to have the internal communication, something I see missing all the time. You need to have the internal communication in place and have a unified, congruent strategy for the business. Yes, there's somebody running the business, in charge of the business, but at the same time, it needs to be company-wide understanding of what this business is, constantly working on identifying what it is that the actual market needs and wants from your business. Because remember, you're not building your online content for yourself, even though a lot of people do. It's a complete, total mistake. You're building it for people who are going to come to consume the content. So you need to, understand these people, and by communicating with them, by dealing with them, most of the businesses that are even semi-successful, they know exactly what I'm talking about here, that you need to know who your audience is, and you need to identify if you don't know who your audience is, and then you deal with that audience and you find out from them what it is that they need and want, and that's what you create for them online to make their life easier, to make the products sell better, and because it's easier to buy them, to make it available. So there's all these things basically you're trying to do it for them. And so the voice part needs to be totally congruent with what your business approach is, based on what their needs and wants are, because you have to be congruent. Otherwise you're never going to build the trust which you need to build to be able to conduct business. So that's how the whole thing works, where you need to internalize the communications within your company, so everybody is exactly on the same page. Whatever the page may be, just like David said, it has to be the same page. And not to say that every tiny little thing will be agreed on by everybody 100%. Not to say that everybody needs to be a yes person and lick somebody's, whatever the term Gina used. I can't use it on the air because my son might be watching it. Gina, did they just make you blush and smile? If I did, that was the intent. And so basically, once you have the message, the communication internally set, once you have it, everybody's understanding and congruence with this, then the message goes out as the voice of the company, and then that achieves the results I think that you're trying to achieve. So it's a combination of giving people what they want, projecting to them what you are, who you are as a company, with everybody kind of being on the same page. And like David says, you need to invest. David just disappeared on me. Okay, you need to invest into your own people, and that's the main thing. Once you invest, into your own company, into your own people, and you deal with people that you can work with, and then things kind of fall into place. So with that, I think it's too bad David disappeared somewhere. Maybe he has another hangout. But I think we'll finish this installment number 6 of the SEO Help book. And David is back. Hello, David.
I'm sorry about that. I
we
just
lost
have
you
my
there for a
connection.
second. So David is back. I think we're going to do this one more time, David. How about if we do take 2 another hour? Now that you're back. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. With that, David, thank you very much. I think it was a very interesting conversation, very useful, hopefully for a lot of people, especially in business. I'll let you finish with a couple of words and we'll wrap it up.
Definitely. Thank you very much. And yes, I think the questions that you brought are absolutely spot on. They're really great. And they also show the difficulty of something as simple as being yourself and projecting yourself through your own voice. And I think working through the difficulty now, actually working through what to do in order to achieve that is exactly the way to go forward. Now, the good news is it is actually very doable. Something which has a concrete effect on the outside of your company has a defined approach on how to achieve that internally. There are certain specific steps you need to take, from the way you communicate things, from the way you actually discover your values, from the way you basically approach the internal communications, and then begin to refine and define your external communications. And I was going to say, SEO Help definitely helps you there. But even if you don't get the book, having that kind of internal dialogue is a great way to begin in order to discover who you are and how you should project yourself.
Okay, I was going to let David have the last word, but since he said a couple of things that were not exactly how they should have been said, it's due to his humility. No, if you don't have the book, get the book. So I will change that statement to this. And the book is available everywhere. And we're going to have another session on chapter number 7, step number 7, as soon as David's schedule allows us that. And we'll continue to march through all the 20 steps until we get all done. So with that, David, again, thank you very much for being here. Pleasure.
Thank you.
And we'll see you, everybody, again. Take care.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.